I do not consent. I am not contracting with you.
Help!
Step out of the vehicle. Stop resisting.
This is kidnapping. I know my rights. Do not touch me.
Got her. Left arm.
The black Audi pulled into the gas station with no license plate on the back bumper. Not a temporary tag visible through tinted glass. Not a dealer plate tucked in the rear window. Nothing. Just smooth, naked metal where the registration should have been. Deputy Marcus Trent had been parked across the street finishing paperwork when a vehicle rolled past him. He watched it pull into the pump lane, watched the driver step out, watched her begin fueling, and he made the decision that patrol deputies make dozens of times per shift. He was going to initiate a traffic stop. The stop itself was textbook. Trent activated his lights, pulled in behind the Audi before the driver could leave the pump, and approached the driver's side window. The woman behind the wheel, later identified as Vanessa Holbrook, did not roll the window down when he knocked. She cracked it. 3 inches. Enough to hear him but not enough to establish normal conversational distance. Trent identified himself and explained the reason for the stop. No visible license plate. Simple. Straightforward. The kind of violation that, 99 times out of 100, gets resolved with a warning and a reminder to display the temporary registration properly. Vanessa Holbrook looked at him through the gap in the window and said 5 words that would transform the next 37 minutes into a legal education neither of them would forget. I am not driving. I am traveling. And if you have ever watched someone try to lawyer their way out of a traffic stop using phrases they learned from a YouTube video, phrases that have never worked for anyone in the history of American jurisprudence, and you stayed for the entire beautiful collapse, hit that subscribe button right now because this channel is your home. Sovereign citizen encounters follow a predictable script. The terminology changes slightly depending on which corner of the internet the suspect has been reading, but the core beliefs remain consistent. They believe that driver's licenses are contracts that can be declined. They believe that statutory law does not apply to them unless they consent. They believe that by invoking specific phrases, they can create a legal force field that renders police authority null and void. Vanessa Holbrook had clearly done her research. She had watched the videos. She had taken notes. She was confident that she knew something the deputy standing at her window did not. She was wrong about that. But confidence and correctness are not the same thing, and Holbrook had an abundance of the former and a complete deficit of the latter. Trent asked for her driver's license, registration, and proof of insurance. Standard request. Holbrook told him she was not required to provide those documents because she was engaged in the act of travel, not the act of driving. She told him that driving was a commercial activity and that she was not conducting commerce. She told him that she did not consent to this interaction and that he had no jurisdiction over her. Trent listened to all of it without interrupting. He had encountered sovereign citizens before. Not frequently, but enough times to recognize the pattern. He knew that arguing with the ideology was pointless. He knew that no amount of explanation about how traffic law actually works would penetrate the belief system Holbrook had constructed. What he needed was not her agreement. What he needed was her identification and her vehicle documentation. Everything else was noise. He repeated his request. License, registration, insurance. Holbrook repeated her refusal. She added a new element this time. She told him that she was not contracting with him. That by providing identification, she would be entering into a binding agreement with a corporate entity masquerading as a government. That she knew her rights. That she had studied the law. That he was violating her constitutional protections by detaining her without cause. Trent told her, calmly and clearly, that refusing to provide identification during a lawful traffic stop was itself a violation of state law. That she was not being asked to sign a contract. She was being asked to comply with a legal obligation that applied to everyone operating a motor vehicle on a public road. Holbrook told him that statutes were not laws. The phrase statutes are not laws is a foundational pillar of sovereign citizen ideology, and it reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of how legal systems function. Sovereign citizens draw a distinction between what they call God's law or common law, which they believe is the only legitimate form of legal authority, and statutory law, which they view as corporate policy that applies only to those who consent to it. This belief is based on selective and grossly distorted readings of legal texts, out-of-context Supreme Court quotes, and a willful refusal to engage with how modern governance actually operates. Statutes are laws. They are rules enacted by legislatures, enforced by executive agencies, and interpreted by courts. They carry the full weight of legal authority. A person cannot opt out of them by refusing to acknowledge their validity. Holbrook's insistence that statutes were not laws was not a legal argument. It was a mantra. A verbal charm she believed would protect her from consequences. Trent did not engage with the semantic debate. He told Holbrook that she had two options. She could provide her identification and documentation, in which case the stop would be completed quickly and she would be free to go. Or she could continue to refuse, in which case he would have no choice but to remove her from the vehicle and place her under arrest for obstruction. Holbrook told him that he had no authority to arrest her. That she was a sovereign individual. That she was not a citizen of the United States but a national of the land. That she did not recognize his jurisdiction. That any attempt to touch her would constitute assault and battery and that she would hold him personally liable in a court of common law. Trent gave her 30 seconds to reconsider. He told her that he did not want to escalate the situation. That all she needed to do was hand over her license. Holbrook sat in silence for those 30 seconds. Then she told him that her identification was in the trunk of the vehicle and that she would retrieve it herself. Trent told her that was not going to happen. That if her identification was in the trunk, he would retrieve it. That she was not going to be allowed to access the trunk unsupervised. Holbrook told him that he was violating her Fourth Amendment rights. That he had no probable cause to search her vehicle. That she did not consent to any search. Trent told her that retrieving identification from a location the driver has specified is not a search. It is compliance with a lawful order. The loop continued. And with every repetition, the window for a peaceful resolution closed a little bit more. What makes sovereign citizen stops so uniquely frustrating for law enforcement is the way the suspect weaponizes delay. Every statement becomes a dissertation. Every request triggers a lecture. The officer is not dealing with someone who is simply refusing to cooperate. They are dealing with someone who believes that if they can just say the right combination of words in the right order, reality will rearrange itself to match their beliefs. It is like arguing with someone who is convinced that gravity is optional and that if they simply refuse to consent to falling, they will float. Trent stepped back from the window and radioed for backup. Not because Holbrook was violent. Not because she was armed. Because he knew from experience that sovereign citizen stops required witnesses, documentation, and an extra set of hands in case the situation required physical intervention. He needed another officer on scene to corroborate what was happening and to assist if Holbrook decided that her refusal to cooperate extended to a refusal to exit the vehicle. Deputy Alicia Brennan arrived approximately 4 minutes later. She approached from the passenger side and immediately noted the lack of a visible license plate. She also noted the heavily tinted rear windows, which were dark enough that seeing into the back seat from the outside was essentially impossible. She knocked on the passenger window. No response. She knocked again. The window lowered approximately 2 inches. Brennan identified herself and asked if there was anyone else in the vehicle. Holbrook told her that question was irrelevant and that she did not have to answer it. Brennan told her that officer safety was not a matter for debate and that she needed a visual confirmation that no one else was in the car. Holbrook told her that she did not consent to being surveilled. Brennan moved to the rear window and shined her flashlight through the tint. The back seat was empty. She returned to the passenger side and informed Trent that the vehicle appeared to contain only the driver. Trent returned to the driver's side window. He told Holbrook that this was her final opportunity to provide identification voluntarily. That if she continued to refuse, he was going to open the door and remove her from the vehicle. That once she was removed, she would be placed in handcuffs and detained while they sorted out who she was and whether the vehicle was legally registered. Holbrook told him that any attempt to touch her would be met with a citizen's arrest for assault. Trent opened the door. The moment the door latch released and the door swung open, Holbrook's demeanor shifted from confident lecturer to panicked victim. She did not attempt to resist physically. She did not grab the steering wheel or brace herself in the seat. But she began screaming. Not words. Not coherent sentences. Just noise. High-pitched, sustained, designed to attract attention and create the impression that she was being harmed. Trent told her to step out of the vehicle. She did not move. He repeated the instruction. She remained in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel, screaming. Brennan moved to the passenger side to assist. Together, they gave Holbrook clear, repeated instructions. Step out. Hands where we can see them. Step out now. Holbrook stopped screaming long enough to say 6 words. I do not consent to this. The phrase I do not consent is another foundational element of sovereign ideology. It is based on the belief that police authority is contractual and that by withholding consent, the suspect can nullify that authority. It does not work that way. Consent is required for certain types of searches. It is not required for a lawful detention during a traffic stop. An officer does not need a suspect's permission to enforce the law. Trent reached into the vehicle and took hold of Holbrook's upper arm. Not roughly. Not with force intended to cause pain. With the amount of physical contact necessary to guide a non-compliant person out of a confined space. Holbrook went limp. Her body became dead weight, forcing Trent and Brennan to support her as they extracted her from the driver's seat and brought her to a standing position outside the vehicle. Once she was standing, Trent told her to place her hands behind her back. She refused. He repeated the instruction. She told him that she was not resisting and that he had no cause to restrain her. He told her that refusal to comply with lawful instructions was, by definition, resistance. He placed her hands behind her back manually and applied handcuffs. Holbrook began screaming again. This time she was saying words. I am being kidnapped. I am being assaulted. Somebody help me. This is illegal. I know my rights. No one helped her. The gas station was not empty. There were other customers at other pumps. They watched. They recorded on their phones. But no one intervened, because it was visibly obvious to anyone with functional pattern recognition that this was a police stop, not a kidnapping. Once Holbrook was in handcuffs, Brennan conducted a search for weapons. Standard officer safety procedure. Holbrook told her that she did not consent to being touched. Brennan told her that consent was not required. The search revealed no weapons. Holbrook was escorted to the back of Trent's patrol vehicle and placed in the rear seat. From inside the vehicle, Holbrook continued her monologue. She demanded to speak to a supervisor. She demanded that the handcuffs be removed immediately. She informed both deputies that they were violating multiple sections of the Constitution and that she would be filing charges against them in a common law court. She told them that their names and badge numbers were being recorded and that they would be held personally liable for their actions. Trent and Brennan returned to the Audi to begin documenting the vehicle. Trent photographed the absence of a license plate. He photographed the VIN number visible through the windshield. He ran the VIN through the system and discovered that the vehicle was registered to Vanessa Holbrook at an address approximately 15 miles from the gas station. The registration had expired 4 months earlier. He also ran Holbrook's name through the database. Her driver's license had been suspended 2 years prior for failure to pay traffic fines. She was not legally allowed to operate a motor vehicle on any public road in the state. The lack of a license plate was not an oversight. It was part of a pattern. Holbrook had stopped complying with vehicle registration requirements, stopped renewing her license, and adopted sovereign citizen ideology as a justification for continuing to drive anyway. The ideology was not a philosophical position. It was a legal fig leaf. A way to frame her refusal to pay fines and fees as a principled stand rather than simple noncompliance. Brennan opened the driver's side door and began searching for the vehicle registration and proof of insurance that Holbrook had refused to provide. She found neither. What she did find, tucked into the center console, was a folder. Inside the folder were printed documents. Articles about sovereign citizenship. Guides to interacting with law enforcement. Template scripts for what to say during traffic stops. Holbrook had not improvised her responses. She had been reading from a playbook. The arrival of the supervisor, Sergeant Kevin Oates, happened at the 11-minute mark. Oates had been dispatched when Trent radioed that he had a sovereign citizen in custody who was refusing to identify and who was making threats of legal action. Oates had dealt with sovereign citizens before. His approach was straightforward. Let them talk. Let them exhaust their script. Then explain, in the simplest possible terms, what was going to happen next. He approached the patrol vehicle and opened the rear door. Holbrook immediately began speaking. She told him that she was being unlawfully detained. That she had committed no crime. That she was a sovereign individual traveling on the land. That the deputies had violated her rights under the 4th, 5th, and 14th Amendments. That she demanded immediate release. Oates listened without interrupting. When she finished, he asked her a single question. "What is your name?" Holbrook told him that she was not required to provide her name without a warrant. Oates told her that was incorrect. That under state law, a person detained during a lawful traffic stop is required to identify themselves. That refusing to provide identification is a separate criminal offense. That she was currently being detained for operating a vehicle without a valid license plate, operating with a suspended license, and failure to provide proof of registration and insurance. That if she continued to refuse to identify, an additional charge of obstruction would be added. Holbrook told him that state law did not apply to her. Oates told her that it did. Holbrook told him that he was wrong. Oates closed the door and walked back to where Trent and Brennan were standing. He asked them if they had been able to confirm the driver's identity through any means other than her voluntary cooperation. Trent told him that the VIN search had returned a registered owner, Vanessa Holbrook, and that the physical description on the registration matched the woman in custody. Oates told him that was sufficient for booking purposes. He returned to the patrol vehicle and informed Holbrook that she was under arrest. That she would be transported to the county jail. That she would be processed, photographed, and held until she could appear before a judge. That the judge would decide whether she would be released on bond or held pending trial. Holbrook told him that he had no authority to arrest her. That this was kidnapping. That she would be filing a federal lawsuit. Oates told her that she was welcome to do that. Then he closed the door and instructed Trent to transport her. The legal framework that governs interactions like the one between Holbrook and the deputies is well established and has been tested in court countless times. The foundation is Terry v. Ohio, a 1968 Supreme Court case that established the standard for lawful stops and detentions. Under Terry, an officer can stop and briefly detain a person if they have reasonable suspicion that the person has committed, is committing, or is about to commit a crime. Operating a vehicle without a visible license plate provides reasonable suspicion. The stop was lawful from the first moment. Once the stop is lawful, the driver has a legal obligation to provide identification. This obligation is codified in the vehicle code of every state. It is not optional. It is not subject to negotiation. It does not require the driver's consent. Holbrook's refusal to provide identification was a crime. Her claim that she was not required to identify without a warrant was legally false. The argument that she was traveling, not driving, is based on a distortion of case law. Sovereign citizens frequently cite cases like Kent v. Dulles, which establish that the right to travel is a fundamental liberty. But those cases refer to the right to move freely across state lines, not the right to operate a motor vehicle without a license. The Supreme Court settled this issue in 1915 in Hendrick v. Maryland, ruling explicitly that states have the authority to require licenses for vehicle operation. Holbrook's belief that she could avoid licensing requirements by calling it travel instead of driving had no basis in law. Her claim that she was not contracting with the state was equally baseless. Obtaining a driver's license is not a contract in the legal sense. It is a regulatory permit. The state has the police power to regulate activities that pose a risk to public safety. Driving a multi-ton machine at high speeds on public roads falls squarely within that power. Holbrook's insistence that she could opt out of regulation by refusing to sign a contract misunderstood the entire structure of how laws work. Her statement that statutes are not laws was the most revealing of all her claims, because it demonstrated that she was not operating in the realm of legal argument at all. She was operating in the realm of belief. And belief, no matter how sincerely held, does not change legal reality. Bodycam footage from the transport to the county jail is largely uneventful but psychologically instructive. Holbrook sat in the back seat of the patrol vehicle, silent for the first few minutes, and then began speaking again. Her tone had changed. The confident, lecturing quality was gone. What remained was something closer to confusion. She asked Trent, through the partition, why he was doing this to her. She told him that she had not hurt anyone. That she had not committed a crime. That all she had been doing was traveling to pick up groceries. Trent did not respond. He had learned from experience that engaging with sovereign citizens during transport was counterproductive. Anything he said would be recorded, misinterpreted, and potentially used against him later. Silence was the safest option. Holbrook continued talking anyway. She told him that he was going to lose his job. That she was going to sue him personally. That he was violating his oath to uphold the Constitution. That he was a traitor to the Republic. That history would judge him. Trent drove. The jail was 18 minutes away. He had 18 minutes of this to endure, and he endured it by focusing on the road and letting Holbrook's words wash over him like background noise. At the 9-minute mark, Holbrook's tone shifted again. She stopped threatening. She started pleading. She told Trent that she had a daughter. That she was supposed to pick her up from school. That if she did not show up, her daughter would be stranded. She asked him if he could just let her go. Just this once. She promised she would get her license plate sorted out. She promised she would take care of the registration. She promised she would never do this again. Trent did not respond to that either. Holbrook began crying. Not loud, performative sobbing. Quiet, exhausted crying. The kind that comes when reality finally breaks through the shell of ideology and a person realizes that the situation they are in is not going to resolve the way they had convinced themselves it would. The booking process at the county jail took approximately 2 hours. Holbrook was photographed, fingerprinted, and processed on charges of operating a vehicle with a suspended license, operating without registration, failure to display a license plate, and resisting arrest without violence. The resisting charge stemmed from her refusal to exit the vehicle and her refusal to comply with lawful instructions during the stop. During the intake interview, Holbrook was asked standard questions. Name. Date of birth. Address. She answered all of them. Not because she had abandoned her sovereign ideology, but because the consequences of not answering, being held indefinitely as a Jane Doe until her identity could be confirmed through other means, were more immediate and more frightening than the abstract threat of contracting with the state. She was given a court date. 31 days from the date of arrest. She was informed that if she failed to appear, a warrant would be issued and she would be arrested again. She was told that she could post bond if someone could be contacted to arrange payment. She gave the name of a friend. The friend was called. The friend declined to post bond. Holbrook spent the night in a holding cell. She was released the following morning on her own recognizance after appearing before a judge via video link. The judge informed her that the charges against her were serious. That operating a vehicle with a suspended license was a criminal offense, not a traffic infraction. That she was facing potential jail time if convicted. He asked her if she understood the charges. Holbrook told the judge that she did not recognize the jurisdiction of the court. The judge told her that whether or not she recognized it, the court had jurisdiction over her. He set her bond conditions. She was not to drive any vehicle until her license was reinstated. She was not to leave the state without permission. She was to appear at all scheduled court dates. Holbrook told him that she would be filing a motion to dismiss on the grounds that the court lacked authority. The judge told her she was free to do that. Then he released her. The video of Holbrook's arrest was uploaded to the Sheriff's Department's social media page 3 days after the incident. It was part of a transparency initiative the department had launched to provide public access to bodycam footage from significant arrests. The video was 18 minutes long, edited down from the full 37-minute interaction to remove redundant sections and protect the privacy of bystanders. Within 6 hours, the video had been viewed 42,000 times. Within 24 hours, it had been shared across multiple platforms and viewed over 300,000 times. The comments section became a battleground. Supporters of law enforcement praised the deputies for their professionalism and patience. Sovereign citizens flooded the thread with claims that the arrest was illegal, that Holbrook had been kidnapped, that the deputies were criminals who should be prosecuted. A subset of commenters focused on a different angle. They pointed out that Holbrook's claims about traveling versus driving were legally nonsensical. They linked to actual case law. They explained, in painstaking detail, why sovereign citizen arguments do not work in court. They provided examples of other sovereign citizens who had tried the same tactics and ended up with criminal convictions. Another subset focused on Holbrook herself. They tracked down her social media profiles. They found posts where she had promoted sovereign citizen ideology. They found videos she had shared explaining how to avoid police encounters by using magic phrases. They found evidence that she had been teaching these tactics to other people, hosting online seminars where she charged money to explain how to opt out of the legal system. The backlash was swift and brutal. Holbrook's online presence, which had been built around the image of a fearless freedom fighter standing up to government tyranny, collapsed under the weight of reality. The video of her arrest, with her screaming and crying and ultimately being handcuffed, did not match the confident, empowered persona she had been selling. The preliminary hearing happened 23 days after the arrest. Holbrook appeared without an attorney. She informed the judge that she was representing herself because she did not recognize the authority of the Bar Association and did not trust lawyers who had taken oaths to a corporate entity masquerading as a government. The judge asked her if she understood that representing herself was a significant disadvantage and that she would be held to the same standards as a licensed attorney in terms of procedure and evidence. Holbrook told him that she had been studying the law extensively and that she was confident in her ability to defend herself. The judge allowed her to proceed pro se. The prosecutor presented the charges and the evidence. Bodycam footage from the stop. Testimony from Deputy Trent and Deputy Brennan. Records showing that Holbrook's license had been suspended and that her vehicle registration had expired. Photographs of the vehicle showing the absence of a license plate. Holbrook objected repeatedly. She objected to the bodycam footage on the grounds that she had not consented to being recorded. The judge overruled the objection, explaining that police bodycams are not subject to consent laws. She objected to the testimony of the deputies on the grounds that they were not impartial witnesses. The judge overruled that objection as well, explaining that police testimony is admissible evidence. She attempted to introduce her own evidence. Printouts of articles about sovereign citizenship. Copies of cases she had found online that she believed supported her arguments. The judge refused to admit them, explaining that articles and out-of-context case summaries were not legal authority. Holbrook became frustrated. She told the judge that he was biased. That the system was rigged. That she was not receiving a fair hearing. The judge told her that if she continued to make unfounded accusations, he would hold her in contempt. She asked the judge a question. "Do you have a flag with gold fringe in this courtroom?" The judge looked at her for a long moment. Then he said yes. Holbrook told him that the gold fringe indicated that the court was operating under Admiralty law and that Admiralty law only applied to maritime commerce. That she was not engaged in maritime commerce. That the court therefore had no jurisdiction over her. The judge told her that the flag fringe theory had been rejected by every court in the country and that it had no basis in law. He found probable cause to bind her over for trial. He set a trial date. He reminded her of her bond conditions. Holbrook told him that she did not consent to the trial. The judge told her that her consent was not required. Between the preliminary hearing and the trial date, Holbrook made a series of decisions that demonstrated the depth of her commitment to sovereign ideology. She filed multiple motions with the court. A motion to dismiss for lack of jurisdiction. A motion to dismiss on the grounds that the charges violated her constitutional rights. A motion to disqualify the judge on the grounds that he was operating under a corporate charter rather than constitutional authority. All of the motions were denied. The court provided detailed written explanations for each denial, citing established case law and explaining why Holbrook's arguments had no legal merit. Holbrook interpreted the denials not as evidence that her legal theories were incorrect but as evidence that the system was corrupt and that the courts were refusing to acknowledge the truth. She began corresponding with other sovereign citizens online. She joined forums. She attended virtual meetups. She shared her story. And in those spaces, she found validation. Other people told her that she was right. That the courts were illegitimate. That the judges and prosecutors were criminals. That if she just stood her ground and refused to consent, she would eventually prevail. The echo chamber reinforced her beliefs and insulated her from the reality that was approaching. The trial date was set. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Her legal strategy, such as it was, had been rejected at every turn. But she remained convinced that when she stood before a jury and explained her position, they would see the truth and refuse to convict her. She was wrong about that too. The trial lasted one day. The prosecution presented their case in approximately 3 hours. They called Deputy Trent to the stand. He testified about the stop, the lack of a license plate, Holbrook's refusal to provide identification, and her eventual removal from the vehicle. He was calm, factual, and unshakable under cross-examination. Holbrook's questions to him were not questions designed to elicit information or to challenge his credibility. They were lectures disguised as questions. She asked him if he was aware that he had violated her constitutional rights. He said no. She asked him if he understood the difference between statutory law and common law. He said yes, and that the distinction she was drawing had no legal significance. The prosecution played the body cam footage. The jury watched 18 minutes of Holbrook refusing to cooperate, claiming sovereign immunity, and eventually being removed from her vehicle while screaming about kidnapping and assault. The footage was damning. Not because it showed Holbrook being mistreated, but because it showed, with perfect clarity, that she had been given every opportunity to comply and had chosen instead to escalate. The prosecution rested. Holbrook took the stand in her own defense. She did not testify about the facts of the case. She did not dispute that she had been driving without a license plate or that her license was suspended. Instead, she used her testimony as a platform to explain sovereign citizen ideology. She talked about the difference between citizens and nationals. She talked about the corporate nature of the government. She talked about admiralty law and the gold fringe on the flag. The jury listened. Their expressions ranged from confusion to boredom to visible frustration. They were not there to hear a political manifesto. They were there to determine whether Holbrook had violated specific statutes. And the evidence that she had was uncontested. The prosecution's closing argument was brief. They pointed to the evidence. They pointed to Holbrook's own admissions. They asked the jury to apply the law as written. Holbrook's closing argument was not brief. She spoke for 27 minutes. She repeated her claims about jurisdiction. She insisted that the jury had the power to nullify the law if they believed it was unjust. She told them that by convicting her, they would be complicit in tyranny. The jury deliberated for 41 minutes. They returned a verdict of guilty on all counts. Sentencing happened 3 weeks later. The judge had reviewed Holbrook's pre-sentence investigation report. He had read the letters submitted on her behalf by friends and family, describing her as a caring mother and a principled person who was simply standing up for what she believed in. He had also read the letters submitted by the prosecution, detailing her history of non-compliance with vehicle registration and licensing requirements and her efforts to spread sovereign citizen ideology online. The judge told Holbrook that he had considered all of the information before him. He told her that he understood she held sincere beliefs about the nature of government and the legitimacy of statutory law. He told her that he respected her right to hold those beliefs. But he also told her that beliefs, no matter how sincerely held, did not exempt her from the law. He sentenced her to 90 days in county jail for operating with a suspended license, with 60 days suspended contingent on her completing a driver improvement course and paying all outstanding fines. He sentenced her to 30 days for failure to display a license plate, to run concurrent with the first sentence. He fined her $800 in court costs and fees. Holbrook told the judge that she did not consent to the sentence. The judge told her that her consent was not required. He remanded her to custody. She was taken from the courtroom in handcuffs. She served 28 days of the 30-day sentence. She was released 2 days early for good behavior. She had been quiet in jail. Compliant. She had not lectured the guards about jurisdiction or admiralty law. She had followed the rules. Because in jail, unlike on the side of the road, the consequences of non-compliance were immediate, certain, and impossible to talk her way out of. The aftermath of Holbrook's case extended far beyond her personal experience. The video of her arrest became a teaching tool. Law enforcement agencies used it in training sessions to demonstrate how to handle sovereign citizen encounters. Legal scholars used it in classes to illustrate the gap between internet legal theories and actual law. And online communities on both sides of the sovereign citizen debate used it as evidence to support their respective positions. For law enforcement supporters, the video was proof that sovereign citizen tactics do not work. That claiming to be traveling instead of driving does not prevent arrest. That refusing to consent does not nullify police authority. That magic words are not a substitute for compliance with the law. For sovereign citizens, the video was proof of something else entirely. That the system is corrupt. That police will arrest you even when you invoke your rights correctly. That courts will convict you even when you explain the truth. They did not see the video as evidence that their ideology was flawed. They saw it as evidence that the system was even more broken than they had believed. Holbrook herself returned to social media after her release. She did not abandon sovereign ideology. She doubled down. She framed her conviction as persecution. She claimed that she had been railroaded by a corrupt system. She insisted that she had been right all along and that the only reason she had been convicted was because the jury had been brainwashed. She began offering consultations, teaching other people how to navigate interactions with law enforcement using sovereign tactics, charging money for access to her expertise. She had learned nothing from the experience except that there was a market for people who wanted to believe that the law did not apply to them. The psychological profile that emerges from Holbrook's behavior is more complex than simple defiance. Sovereign citizenship is not just a rejection of legal authority. It is a framework for understanding the world that provides adherents with a sense of control and agency in situations where they might otherwise feel powerless. Holbrook's decision to adopt sovereign ideology did not happen in a vacuum. It happened after her license was suspended for unpaid fines. After she lost her ability to drive legally and faced the choice between paying the fines or finding a justification for continuing to drive anyway. Sovereign ideology gave her that justification. It told her that the fines were illegitimate. That the suspension was illegitimate. That the entire regulatory structure was a corporate fraud. It transformed her from someone who had broken the rules and was facing consequences into someone who was standing up to tyranny. It gave her a narrative in which she was the hero, not the violator. That narrative was powerful. It was powerful enough that she clung to it even when it led directly to her arrest. Even when it led to her conviction. Even when it led to jail time. Because abandoning the narrative would have required her to confront the much more uncomfortable truth. That she had been wrong. That the law applied to her just as much as it applied to everyone else. That her refusal to comply had not been a principled stand but a series of bad decisions compounded by ideology. The broader implications of the Holbrook case extend into questions about how legal systems handle individuals who genuinely do not recognize their authority. Holbrook was not pretending. She was not lying when she said she believed the court lacked jurisdiction. She genuinely believed it. She had spent hours, possibly hundreds of hours, reading materials that told her the courts were illegitimate. She had internalized that belief so deeply that no amount of evidence to the contrary could shake it. This creates a unique challenge for the legal system. How do you hold someone accountable when they reject the fundamental premise that you have the authority to hold them accountable? The answer, as demonstrated by Holbrook's case, is that you do it anyway. The law does not require belief. It requires compliance. A person who does not believe that theft is illegal can still be convicted of theft. A person who does not believe the court has jurisdiction can still be prosecuted and sentenced. But the process is frustrating for everyone involved. For the officers who have to spend 37 minutes coaxing a driver out of a car for a violation that should take 5 minutes to address. For the judges who have to sit through preliminary hearings where the defendant argues about flag fringe and admiralty law. For the prosecutors who have to present evidence to juries while the defendant lectures them about corporate government. And ultimately, for the defendant herself, who spends time in jail and accumulates fines and legal debt because she refused to acknowledge a reality that existed regardless of her acknowledgement. 1 year after her arrest, Holbrook's life had changed in ways both predictable and surprising. She had completed the driver improvement course as required by her sentence. She had paid most of the fines, though she still owed several $100s. Her driver's license had been reinstated after she completed all of the requirements, though she had resisted every step of the process and complained loudly on social media about being forced to contract with the state. She was still driving. And she was still involved in the sovereign citizen movement. But she had made one adjustment to her approach. She now displayed a license plate on her vehicle. Not because she believed in the legitimacy of license plate requirements, but because she had learned that driving without one was the most visible, most easily enforceable violation that police could use to initiate stops. She had not changed her beliefs. She had simply become more strategic about when and how she expressed them. Her arrest video continued to circulate. It had been viewed over 2 million times. It had been featured in documentaries about sovereign citizens. It had been dissected in legal podcasts. And every time someone new discovered it, the comments section would fill up again with arguments about jurisdiction and admiralty law and whether Holbrook had been right all along. The deputies who arrested her had moved on. Trent was still on patrol. Brennan had been promoted to sergeant. Neither of them thought about Holbrook unless someone asked them about the video. To them, it had been one stop among thousands. Memorable because of the ideology involved, but not fundamentally different from any other stop where a driver refused to cooperate and had to be removed from their vehicle. To Holbrook, it was the defining moment of her life. The moment when she had stood up to the system and refused to back down. The fact that she had been arrested, prosecuted, convicted, and jailed did not change her belief that she had been right. It reinforced it. Because in the world she had constructed, persecution was proof of truth. The video ends with Holbrook in the back of a patrol car, handcuffed, no longer lecturing or threatening but simply sitting in silence. That silence is the most honest moment in the entire encounter. It is the moment when the ideology has run out of words. When the magic phrases have failed. When the belief that reality can be talked into submission has collided with the reality that it cannot. Vanessa Holbrook believed that she could drive without a license plate. She believed that calling it traveling would protect her. She believed that refusing to consent would nullify police authority. She believed that statutes were not laws. She believed that the court lacked jurisdiction. She believed all of it with absolute conviction. And none of it mattered. Not to the deputies who removed her from the car. Not to the prosecutor who charged her. Not to the jury that convicted her. Not to the judge who sentenced her. The law applied to her whether she recognized it or not. The handcuffs closed around her wrists whether she consented or not. The jail cell door locked behind her whether she believed in its legitimacy or not. Reality is not a negotiation. It is not a contract that can be declined. It is not a jurisdiction that can be challenged away with the right combination of words. Holbrook spent 30 days learning that lesson. And then she got out and went right back to teaching other people the same ideology that had put her there in the first place. Because the most powerful thing about belief is that it does not require evidence. It requires only the decision to keep believing. And Holbrook had made that decision a long time ago. The question the video cannot answer, the question that lingers after the footage ends and the analysis is complete, is this. How many traffic stops does it take before someone realizes that the magic words are not working? How many arrests? How many court appearances? How many nights in jail? For Vanessa Holbrook, the answer was clearly, more than one. For the people who watch her video and see themselves, who believe they have discovered the secret to opting out of the social contract, the answer is still being written, one traffic stop at a time. Let me know your thoughts in the comment. Do remember to hit the subscribe button, like and share this story, and I'll see you in the next one.